You think you understand the power behind Ayatollah? The truth is far more complex and deliberate. It was not always a title of absolute authority. For most of history, it meant the exact opposite. This story begins in shadows. In the cold absence of the prophesied 12th Imam, who disappeared in the 9th century. Shia scholars, the Ulama, saw themselves as placeholders, guardians. They studied in quiet, dusty libraries, their authority purely spiritual. They were to guide the community, to interpret God's law, but never to rule. Ruling was a worldly corruption, a role reserved for the Imam's eventual return. For over 1,000 years, this was the pact. The scholars would wait. Politics was a poison they were sworn to avoid. Then a slow, almost imperceptible change began. In the 16th century, the Safavid kings made Shia Islam the state religion of Persia. Suddenly, the clergy were brought in from the cold. They were given land, funding, and a voice in the royal court. A dangerous partnership was forged. The kings gained divine legitimacy. The clergy gained worldly influence. But they were still not the rulers. They were advisors, sometimes critics, but always second to the Shah. This delicate balance, this separation of the spiritual from the political, defined Iranian power for centuries. It was a system built on a single core belief. The clergy must remain separate from the state, a principle held as sacred for 1,200 years. So how did one man in the 20th century convince millions to shatter it? How did a scholar's title become a general's command? A single succession crisis, 1,400 years in the past, holds the absolute key to understanding today's Ayatollah. The depth is shocking. The year is 632. The air in Medina is thick, not just with the Arabian heat, but with a suffocating uncertainty. The Prophet Muhammad is dead. He was a messenger, a statesman, the unifier of tribes, but he left behind a devastating question. Who would lead now? He had named no successor, not explicitly. In the frantic hours that followed, the community fractured. One group, the majority, gathered and elected a close companion, Abu Bakr. They believed leadership should fall to the most capable. This path would become Sunni Islam. But another group felt a deep sense of betrayal. They were the Shi'at Ali, the party of Ali. They believed leadership was a divine right, passed through the Prophet's bloodline. To them, the only legitimate heir was Muhammad's cousin and son-in-law, Ali ibn Abi Talib. This wasn't just a political disagreement, it was a spiritual schism. Two fundamentally different ideas of authority were born in that moment, one based on community consensus, the other on sacred lineage and divine appointment. For the followers of Ali, this initial defeat forced them down a path of patience, persecution, and waiting. They would wait for their rightful leaders, the Imams, to guide them. But what happens when the last Imam disappears? This is where the story takes a radical, unexpected turn, and the concept of the Ayatollah begins to secretly form. The 12th Imam disappeared, and with him, the direct link to divine guidance. The aftermath? Unfathomable. For over 2 centuries, the Shia community followed a sacred bloodline, a succession of 11 Imams, direct descendants of the Prophet's family. They were more than leaders. They were living proof of God's plan on earth, infallible guides in a world of chaos. Their authority was absolute, their word divine law. But this divine chain was about to snap. In the cold, paranoid city of Samarra, under the constant watch of the Abbasid Caliphate, the 11th Imam died. He left behind a son, a boy of only 5 years, a child kept hidden from the world, a ghost in his own city to protect him from assassins. This was Muhammad al-Mahdi, the 12th and final Imam. After his father's death, he entered a state of occultation. For 70 years, he communicated with his followers only through 4 chosen deputies. A whispered message here, a secret letter there, a fragile link to the divine. Then, in the year 941, a final message arrived. It declared the period of special deputyship was over. The major occultation had begun. It would last until the end of time. Then, silence, a silence that has now lasted for over 1,000 years. The community was cut adrift. The infallible guide was gone, hidden by God's own command. This created a terrifying power vacuum. Who speaks for God now? Who interprets His will when the appointed speaker is hidden from view? They didn't just interpret law, they fundamentally rewrote the social and spiritual order. Without a single revolution, it began with an absence, a profound silence. In the 10th century, the last Imam, the community's divine guide, was believed to have vanished into occultation. The direct link to God's authority on earth was gone. Imagine the quiet desperation, the spiritual vacuum. Who would now interpret the law? Who would guide the faithful? Into this void, a new figure stepped, not a prophet, not a king, a scholar known as a jurist. In cold, lamp-lit rooms, surrounded by ancient texts, these men began a monumental task. They applied logic, reason, and rigorous study to the divine word. They weren't claiming revelation. They were building a system, a complex legal framework to govern every aspect of life, from prayer to commerce. Their authority wasn't seized with a sword. It was earned, one legal opinion, one fatwa at a time. The community, hungry for certainty in a world without its imam, began to listen. The scholar's study became the new center of power. But how did this intellectual authority, born from necessity, become something so much more? How did an elite class of interpreters become the de facto rulers of the soul? For over 1,000 years, the highest Shia authorities practiced a form of political patience. They advised from the shadows. They guided. They interpreted. They did not rule. Direct governance, they believed, was reserved for a single, divinely appointed figure, the hidden Imam. Their job was to preserve the faith, not seize the state. Then one man shattered that tradition. From a dusty, quiet exile in Iraq, Ayatollah Khomeini saw a world on fire. He saw corruption and foreign powers controlling his homeland. He saw a vacuum of legitimate authority. In a series of lectures, he posed a revolutionary question. If God's law is perfect for all time, why should its implementation be suspended? Why wait for an imam who may not return for centuries? This was the birth of a radical new doctrine, Velayat-e, the guardianship of the jurist. Khomeini argued that the absence of the imam was not a reason for inaction. It was a divine mandate for the most learned scholar to rule, not just to guide, but to command. The scholar's pen was being reforged into a ruler's scepter. The very definition of religious authority was being rewritten. This was no longer about spiritual guidance. This was about total political power. An idea once confined to seminary debates was now a blueprint for revolution. But how could one man's abstract theory possibly seize control of an entire nation's destiny? This single constitutional decree didn't just alter a government. It redirected the trajectory of an entire civilization. The year is 1979. The air in Tehran crackles with electricity. The Shah's 2,500-year monarchy has crumbled into dust. A king is in exile. A nation holds its breath. But this was not just another coup. It was a theological experiment on a national scale. From a cold Parisian suburb, an exiled cleric had watched it all. Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. For centuries, Shia scholars had preached political quietism, waiting for the return of a messianic figure, the hidden Imam. Khomeini shattered this 1,300-year tradition. He posed a question that had been buried by time. In the Imam's long absence, who should rule? He offered a radical, almost heretical answer, a theory called Velayat-e, the guardianship of the jurist. It argued that the most learned religious scholar had not just the right, but the divine duty to govern the state. An idea once confined to quiet seminaries was about to be forged into the supreme law of a modern nation. The halls of the assembly of experts are thick with debate. The future is being written line by line, granting one man ultimate authority. How did a philosophical concept known to so few become the absolute law for millions? You won't believe the full scope of Iran's supreme leader's power. It all hinges on this one word, Ayatollah. Today, it signifies the ultimate ruler, a man who commands armies, controls a nation's wealth, whose televised speeches can silence a sprawling city. But this was not its origin. For over 1,000 years, the word was a quiet honor, reserved for the most pious scholars in the hushed, lamplit halls of Qom. Men of books and contemplation, not battlefields and decrees. The transformation is the secret, the paradox at the heart of modern Iran. How did a scholar's title become a ruler's crown? The answer was forged in the freezing winter of 1979. Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini returns from exile. The air in Tehran is electric with revolution and thick with uncertainty. He brings a radical, almost forgotten doctrine, Velayat-e, the guardianship of the jurist. For centuries it was a fringe theological concept, debated in dusty seminaries. Khomeini made it the constitution of a state. This single idea fused the scholar's authority with the state's raw power. The most learned cleric was no longer just a spiritual guide. He was the guardian, the final arbiter of politics, war, and law. Today, the supreme leader is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. He oversees the powerful judiciary. He vets every presidential candidate. His religious authority is political power. His political power is nearly absolute, from a scholar's title to a ruler's decree. An entire system of governance resting on one man's interpretation of God's will. A structure of immense power, born from the incredible journey of a single word,